Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Femme Force podcast. My name is Rachael Paskvan, and I am your host. And today I'm really excited to be joined by Becky Upchurch. Now, Becky is a clarity and mindset coach, and she is the founder of Higher Good Coaching, which helps women and men, but mostly women, reclaim their time, energy, and identity through transformational mindset work and boundary setting. And she's really working to showcase her mission, which is that women, there's never a too busy season for self-discovery and change, which I think not just when this podcast is being, recorded, like right before the holiday seasons and the new year and all of those like big transformational times that we all have in our life, but just in general, women need to hear about like how to set these boundaries because every season is just too busy all the time. And we're in that phase of I'll do it in a month. Well, next year it'll be fine. Next month will be less busy. So I'm super excited to dive into this because it's something I definitely need. And I feel like so many other people need. So thank you so much for being here, Becky. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. So tell the audience just a little bit about yourself and like how you became a coach.
So I actually came into the world of coaching through the world of academia. I was a classroom teacher. I left the classroom to become an instructional coach, which is work that I love. And I did, my initial coach training in that role. And I really loved just coaching and the ideas that kind of started sparking in my mind around, hey, this is really great for instructional purposes in a school setting, but also what can this look like outside of a school setting? And that's where I started doing my deeper work. I enrolled in an ICF accredited coach training program, did that. And I really decided that I wanted to help people with more the life coaching side of things. And through that journey, I started realizing uniquely, you talked about, obviously, I've coached both men and women, but I really have a soft spot for women because I feel like we have a particular set of needs and circumstances based on how we were socialized and kind of how we collectively move in the world and the expectations on what it means to be a good woman, a good wife, a good mother, a good daughter, whatever it may be. And so I've kind of leaned into that side of the work.
And I love that. And you work with women who feel overwhelmed and disconnected, like you said, from the lives that, that we really want. I'm sure that we all don't want to be running around like chickens with our heads cut off and we want some form of stability. So how do you help women get into that space of clarity and mindset?
So I think of it as kind of a twofold process. On the one side is the strategic piece. Okay, how do I figure out how to get stuff off my plate? How do I figure out what goes on the plate, what comes off of the plate, and all that kind of stuff? And then the other side of it is the mindset piece. And something that I tell people all the time, I don't know if you can hear that. That's my dog in the background.
Oh, he's okay. Welcome. We're all welcome.
Perfect. So there's a mindset piece because you can have the best strategy in the world, but if you implement all the strategies and you haven't worked on your mindset, it's very easy to backpedal. It's very easy to do the things and feel like crap about it. So my goal is to help people not just figure out what they need to change and what that's going to look like and how to do it, but also feel good about it. Because if you're making positive changes, but you're feeling guilty, you're feeling shame, then you're still not enjoying your life. You're still feeling like crap. You're still feeling overwhelmed, just in a different way.
No, 1,000%. And I think that segues really into something that you're talking about a lot and that you really want women to understand, which is boundaries. And I feel like boundaries is it's the word of the season. It's the word of the decade. Mm-hmm. It's very, very prevalent right now. Just so many different things where we're telling people like you have to set boundaries with your family and at work and like with your personal life and things like that. So I want to dive into boundaries. What are some of the biggest blockages that women have when they're trying to set boundaries?
I think one of the first things is a lot of people don't fully understand what a boundary actually is. I know for myself, there were a lot of times where I kind of saw boundaries as I'm going to put this boundary into place with this person so that I get the outcome that I want from that person. Almost like a boundary is a way to control how other people behave.
Okay.
And yes, sometimes when you set a boundary, it does shape the way somebody else chooses to interact with you. But the reality is that boundaries actually have nothing to do with other people. They have to do with us. So if I don't like something you're doing and I say to myself, well, I'm going to set this boundary so that she stops doing that. Well, the reality is you might not ever stop doing that thing that I want you to stop doing. So the boundary is for me to decide when she does that thing, how am I choosing to respond? Because at the end of the day, there are times where we express a boundary and somebody says, oh my gosh, I didn't know that that was a preference or whatever. And they adjust accordingly. And there are times where people are going to say, well, this is just who I am, or I don't think it's that big of a deal. And then it's back on us to figure out, okay, well, what do I want to do about this?
And then how do you want to react and how do you want to act? So it all.
Yeah. So that's kind of the top thing that I think makes it difficult. If you don't really understand what a boundary is, it's really hard to set them and maintain them because it's like, well, wait, this isn't working. And it's like, right, because we're approaching it completely wrong. The second thing that I think is the biggest barrier overall, specifically with women to setting boundaries, is the way that we are socialized. I think most people do not set boundaries because they fear that they are going to be seen a certain way. So if I set a boundary with you, I worry that you're going to get mad at me. You're not going to like me. You're going to think less of me. I'm not going to be included in the social group. And this is problematic in two ways. The first way is we were taught to believe that, and it's not necessarily true. And so letting go of all these things we were taught about, oh, well, if you say no, you're not a nice person. I think if you talk to the 10 people who know me best in the world, they would all tell you that I'm a very kind and loving person and I appreciate my people and I will do anything for them. And I think those same 10 people would also tell you that I can hold a boundary like nobody's business. So we have this sense as women often that you can either have strong, healthy boundaries or you can be nice and be well liked. And the fact is those two things can coexist. And I would even argue that the more boundaried you are, the more it actually helps your relationships to grow. Because when you are present with people and you do show up, you're showing up as the best possible version of yourself. And that is what nurtures connection with others.
I mean, I also think it's because we're so empathetic as women. Do you think that's what it is, that we just are so much more in tune with our emotions and our maternal side and our empathy side and our giving side, that it makes it harder for us to be able to be like, I'm going to set these boundaries because you said like, you don't want to feel hurt or you're going to be mean to people or all of these other things. And I think, just from any kind of standpoint, that's what gets women in trouble a lot. Like even in like a safety perspective, security and a safety perspective. Like we'll get in an elevator with somebody that makes us uncomfortable because we're like, well, we don't want to be rude or mean. Like, but I'm always like, you can be mean, you can be rude. It's just being safe. You're being fine, set a boundary. But this is more of an emotional trigger for it. Do you think that's part of the issue, is that we're just so empathetic naturally?
I do. I think that is a big part of it, that we have these kind of natural inclinations to be nurturing, to be compassionate. We tend to look and see, okay, what does the collective need? We tend to be caretakers, not just within our families, within our social circles. And I think a lot of us are also, without even realizing it, often socialized to really lean into those tendencies. So it's like, I'm naturally empathetic. And I was raised by a mother who is, at almost 90, is still baking pies for the neighbors and, doing all those things that, are the traditional kind of things you think about of how do you take care of your community? How do you show up for other people? And so I think a lot of times things that we don't even realize are modeled for us become a part of our identity. And then it's really hard to detach from those things, especially when they are tagged onto something like a natural caring for others or a natural instinct to be a protector.
Which is it just says so much about like also the societal, like the generational societal roles for each of us and like how our gender roles are so specific, which is mind boggling that like you see it from your mother. So it carries on. And at least we're in a generation now where they're like, well, but you also have to work and you also have to do this. And like, it's the whole Barbie speech. So we're trying to do it all here.
Well, it's interesting, a story that actually came up just the other day with somebody, speaking of gender roles. And I think some of it, this speaks to how so much of it is unconscious.
Oh,
So
yeah.
many years ago, I was in a relationship and I did not realize some of the things I was doing until one night, my then boyfriend made the comment about, he goes, we had hung out with my parents and he said, "Oh, I get now why you do some of the things you do." And I said, "What do you mean?"
Ouch. Ouch.
And yeah, well, he gave the example of, we were sitting down to have dinner and we were living together. And so he got up to get something. And I said, "Oh, what do you need?" And he was like, "Oh, I left my drink in the kitchen." And I immediately stood up and went and got his drink. And it didn't, like, I thought nothing
Yeah.
of it. I don't even remember this happening. But in the moment, he was like, "That's really weird. Like, I could have gotten my own drink. Why did she jump up and do that?" And it was strange for him. And then fast forward a few weeks later, we happened to be at my parents' house and he watched my parents' dynamic and he had that aha moment of, oh, because she's been watching that her whole life. And if my dad says, "Oh, I'm thirsty," my mom immediately runs to the kitchen and gets him a drink. Or if my dad needs a napkin, he wouldn't even think to stand up because he's so used to her doing things. My father has since passed away, but, my parents were married for over 50 years. And it's just, that was the dynamic. And I had no idea. If you had asked me, I would have been like, "No, men can do things for themselves. I'm not going to wait on any man. I'm not." And
We're
yet
like,
in
we're
my
independent women over here. We're saying all this stuff, but
yes,
drink, babe.
yes.
What do you need, baby? Let me get it for you.
Right. And then here I am doing those things and not even being conscious of it. And so that's a big piece of it also, is recognizing our own habits and recognizing the places where we may need to set a boundary. And we are just kind of going through life thinking, "Oh no, I'm doing it differently than people before me or people that modeled things." And yet somehow those things tend to seep in.
Well, they're deep seated. I mean, especially if you're
Mm-hmm.
watching parents or like those kind of people that are so heavily a high percentage of your life until a certain age. And that's what you're mimicking off of. I think the gender roles and watching that completely makes sense. And when you're trying to create these boundaries, you've said before that there's like a direct link between setting boundaries and finding time to then set the boundaries and keep them. So can you explain what that looks like in an action?
Yes. So the relationship to me between boundaries and time, one of the biggest things I hear from women collectively, individually, is there is not enough time in my life to do all of the things that I need to do, let alone anything I want to do.
Yeah.
And so the way I kind of look at it is, every single time you say no to something, you are opening space to say yes to something else. So if I can say no to 3 things on my to-do list, that opens up those 3 time slots to bring in things that I actually want to be doing every time I get rid of something I don't. And that's where the boundary piece comes in. So for example, if I have agreed to, be the person who brings baked goods to the monthly neighborhood meeting or whatever it is, well, the time that it takes me to go grocery shopping and bake those things and go to the meeting is time that I could be using for something else. So if I set a boundary around that and say, "Hey, you know what? I'm happy to fund this if somebody else can be the baker," or "I'm happy to pick up something cleaning," or "I'm happy to, rotate with somebody else." I could just say, "I simply don't want to do it anymore." That's always an option too. But, there's different iterations of what that boundary could look like. But any iteration of that boundary is going to help me reclaim more of my time. And then when I get in touch with my core values, which is kind of that first piece of figuring out, okay, what do I need to have boundaries around? What's most important to me? So how do I get more of the things that are super important to me, the things that make me feel like me, the things that light me up, the things that bring joy to my life? How do I get more of those onto that to-do list and fewer of the things that I look at and groan and that make me want to get on my fainting couch?
And do you think it takes we have to then set the time aside to figure out what is actually priority of what we want and what's going to benefit us more comparative to this is not a necessity. We don't need to be doing this. It's not bringing joy or anything to anybody's life to have to bake something. I mean, for someone, maybe not this girl, every month. Is it setting
For
time
sure.
aside?
And I, excuse me, I created an exercise, I think maybe a year ago, to help people do that, to kind of prioritize, like, okay, let's actually take an inventory of like, how am I spending my time over the course of the week?
Yeah.
And then kind of labeling those different things. Like, what are the things that absolutely have to be done and absolutely have to be done by me? Because at the end of the day, realistically, in order to live the life I want to live, there are certain things that I have to be responsible for that I can't necessarily outsource, right?
Mm.
But then there are things where it's like, oh, this thing has to be done, but I'm not the person who has to do it. I make the joke all the time. I am not a super techie person. Like, I am a functional techie person. Like, I know enough tech to function, but once I get out of kind of the basics of technology, I can do other things, but it will take me a lot of time. So if I have to do something with tech that I'm not familiar with, and I know, oh, that's going to take me 5 hours to do. Okay, well, if I have a virtual assistant who can do that for me in an hour, to me, it's like, well, I'm just going to pay her to do that thing, and I'm going to take that 5 hours back, right?
Chat
So
GPT all day long.
yeah, it's kind of that toss up of, where can I build in that time? Because sometimes it has to be us and it has to be done. Sometimes it has to be done and it doesn't have to be us. Sometimes it has to be us, but it doesn't actually have to be done. We are just telling ourselves a story. If you're anything like me, I know there have been seasons where I've had something on my to-do list week after week after week after week. And finally, I've looked at it and said, Becky, if this thing has been on your to-do list for more than 4 weeks and hasn't been done, you need to do a gut check and ask yourself, is it really that important? Because you got 2 options here. You're either taking it off the to-do list because it's not important, or it stays on the to-do list and you need to figure out a way that it gets done, right? Because I think sometimes it's like we get so overwhelmed with all the things that we don't actually stop to question, what is this? What does this need to look like? And then sometimes there's stuff on the list where it's like, you know what? This is not super important and it's not mine to own, and I can just hand it off to someone else. Or I can graciously say, friends, I have been the baked good lady for the past 2 years. I am retiring that hat. Who would like to have it? Or, I remember years ago, I was working with a client and she was doing a lot of sports mom things. And it was kind of like, oh, I've got to do the sports mom things because I want my kids to have these opportunities. And I totally get that. And if you hit a point where your bandwidth doesn't allow that, then you have a conversation with sports parents and say, love this program, want it to continue. So let's talk about who else is going to take on some of this load, because it's not going to be all me all the time.
Things I need to learn daily in my life. But what changes do you see once people are actually setting and clear boundaries and utilizing them?
So one of the first things that happens is I think people get surprised that setting the boundary is actually the easy part. Because what inevitably happens in most situations is, if I'm setting a boundary with somebody that I've never set a boundary with, or in an area where I've never set a boundary, I'm going to receive pushback. And I believe the reason for this is our brains don't like change, right? We like the status quo. So if I'm suddenly changing your reality by setting a boundary of what you can expect from me, your brain is going to be like, danger, danger. We don't like this change. And it's going to tell you, oh, we got to keep the status quo. So it's going to be, oh, but we always go out for happy hour on Thursday nights. What do you mean you can't come to Thursday happy hour anymore? That's a normal response.
Yeah.
And we often receive it as, oh, this is evidence that I shouldn't have set this boundary. This is evidence that that person's going to be upset with me. This is evidence that I'm doing something wrong by creating this chaos in the situation. So that's kind of the first thing that happens, is we have to realize that, oh, hey, we've set this boundary. Now what we need to do is decide, and I always suggest that people plan this on the front end. When I set a boundary, this is the boundary I'm setting. This is how I'll communicate it if it needs to be communicated. And if somebody pushes up against the boundary and pushes back on it, this is how I will choose to respond. Because again, the boundary's for me. So if I'm setting a boundary that maybe I go to a work happy hour every week and I suddenly realize I need that time for my family, or I need that time for a project.
Yeah.
And I communicate, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be going to happy hours for the foreseeable future. I can't wait to hear the stories afterwards, in lunch the next day or whatever it is. And people push back. I can decide if I just want to say, well, sorry, that's just what it is. I can decide if I want to make a funny joke. I can decide if I want to be like, oh, well, I'm training for my climbing Mount Everest, so I really don't have the time. Different people have different personalities and different things feel comfortable to them. But getting that kind of practice in advance to know that, yes, people are likely going to push back. And if I choose to respond, having something that I can respond with so that I'm not in the moment like, oh, okay, well, I don't want you to be upset. So yes, I'll go to happy hour. Forget I said anything. So that's kind of the first piece. And then I feel like the second piece is once people are actually, okay, they now understand the boundary. They're respecting the boundary. They're responding to the boundary. Getting comfortable with that and realizing that it's okay to lean out of the things you want to lean out of so that you can lean into the things that feel more aligned and more important to you.
And I think that's such internal work too, though, to figure out how to do that. And that has to take a lot of time to kind of figure out. So when you're trying to shift your mindset just to be able to be like, I want to set boundaries, what are some things that we should be saying, or manifesting, but affirmations or scripts that we should be saying for ourselves, to express boundaries within ourselves, to know that we can say them with confidence. I've got other things to do.
So one of the things I joke all the time that I have always had a love-hate relationship with affirmations. And the short version is when I first was introduced to affirmations, I loved the concept. I was like, I know some people are like, oh, it's so woo. And I'm like, hello, have you met me? And I'm a weird mix of woo and very practical. And so I loved it as a concept. And I found that it didn't work for me. And then I knew other people that they were just manifesting left and right with their affirmations. And I'm trying to do the same thing. And it wasn't working. And instead of my looking at it and saying, what is it working about this? It was, what am I doing wrong? Because that's very often our default, especially as women, like, oh, if it's not working, I must be the problem, right? It's me. I'm the problem. It's me.
Yeah. 1,000% Taylor knew.
Yeah. And so that was kind of my frustration. And this was the relationship I had with affirmations. And then fast forward, and I learned that the best way to set an affirmation is to make something that is personalized, because inevitably what happens is if I'm trying to say something that my brain doesn't believe, and it's a huge leap. Like, let's say I fundamentally want to believe that setting boundaries makes me awesome. Like, it makes me an amazing, strong person. But what I actually believe is that setting boundaries is dangerous to my relationships. Well, if I just start practicing setting boundaries is going to make everybody love me, my brain is immediately going to be like, no, it's not. And it's going to give me all of that evidence that's rooted in what I believe now. So instead of just kind of grabbing an affirmation and practicing it, we need to personalize, and then we need to do kind of a baby step method. So for example, if we're talking about, I'm somebody who wants to set boundaries and I want to shift my mindset to get more comfortable with that. There's a tool in the coaching world that it actually comes from like the therapeutic world, and which is not my area of expertise, but the general premise is familiar to a lot of people, but I'm just going to very briefly explain it. And it is called different things by different people, but it's the idea of it's kind of an acronym, but you have a circumstance. So the circumstance might be going back to that same thing. Like, I have to do all the baking for this event. That's the circumstance. Like 800,000 cupcakes need to be baked for whatever event.
Yeah.
And then what is the thought I have about that? Well, let's go back to, I want to set a boundary around this baking thing. So baking has to happen. My thought is, if I don't do the baking, people are going to be upset. Right. And then when I think that thought, what does that bring up in me? Right. So there's a circumstance, which is a neutral happening. There are the thoughts I have about it. Those thoughts make me feel a certain way. And then the way I feel leads to how I respond. What do I choose to do? What do I choose to not do? And then those responses, that's kind of what becomes my reality. So when we're trying to switch our viewpoint on something, so if I'm trying to switch my perspective about boundaries and how I feel about setting a boundary, the first thing I need to know is what are the thoughts I'm having around boundaries? So before we even get to kind of that model, which is what some people call it, like I would make, I like to do a lot of like bullet brain dump. So setting boundaries. I might just write like setting boundaries with coworkers at the top of a piece of paper. And then I'm just going to start a bulleted list of all the thoughts that come up. And so the first one might be, they'll be mad. I won't be part of the group. In my experience, when I do this, usually the first handful of thoughts are things that I kind of know I already think. Like, oh, I won't be one of the group anymore. People might push back on it. I don't want to create work drama. But eventually, after I've gotten out some of those initial things that I'm aware of, more often than not, there are at least one, sometimes several things that pop into my head that I kind of go, oh, wait, where did that come from? And it's these thoughts that are in my brain that I'm not even cognizant of. So what I like to do is just write them all down and then try to feel like, where is that one that kind of hit me like, oof, where did that come from? And yikes. And then that's the one that I'll use that process on, right? So if a thought that I never had was, I don't want to be ostracized in this job like I was in my last job, right? Maybe I've had a bad experience. Oh, maybe that's the thought that's the real problem. So that I'm going to look at that and say, okay, well, when I have that thought, where does that get me, right? How am I feeling? How am I behaving? And then what result do I get? And then we start the process of using that same model of, okay, what's the circumstance? What's a different thought I might have, right? Yeah. So how do I shift to a better thought? And again, where this differs for me from affirmations is with an affirmation, it's often people just kind of will pick a general affirmation or they'll Google like affirmations for whatever. But it really taps into your specific thought patterns. And okay, what am I specifically thinking in this situation that's getting me stuck or that's not getting me the result I want? Because if we use that model of circumstance, thought, feeling, action, result, we can very clearly see the through line between what we're thinking and how it's impacting the life that we're creating. So then we can kind of do the backwards planning hack of, okay, well, if I want a different outcome, I need a different thought. So what thought can help me get the outcome I want? What does that look like? And then practicing that thought. And that's the part that's really important because I think a lot of people think with mindset, like, oh, I'm going to do mindset work and then I'm not going to be bothered by these things that I think anymore. The problem with that is a lot of us have thoughts in our brains that we have been practicing for decades, whether consciously or subconsciously. If you're trying to change something and it's taken you've spent 20 years silently repeating to yourself that you have to be a people pleaser, you're not going to wake up after a day and suddenly have let that go. You have to practice the new thinking. You have to practice the new thoughts. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. I do a lot of writing and journaling. One of the things I have done over the years is I will record the thoughts that I want to think as a voice memo. And like, I'll be out walking the dogs and I'll listen to my own voice, repeating them over and over and over.
Oh, that's going to be really powerful.
Yeah. To just like really get that kind of pathway carved into my mind. Because otherwise it's very easy to fall back on old thoughts. And then when we do, we have that new thought to go, nope, you know what? I'm not thinking that anymore. I'm thinking this other thing instead.
Yeah, which I think, but just hearing your own voice and hearing that you took the time to record these words for like you to listen to, like that has to be really powerful to then be like, but I know I really want this because this is obviously something I have been saying.
Right.
And we're trying to do these mindset shifts and then trying to set these boundaries and like not have it just be a one and done kind of thing. They aren't just like a one-time fix, as you've said. And it's a daily practice that we have to do. So what's one mindset shift you wish every woman could just adapt right today?
I think the biggest thing that I wish that women knew was that it is okay to say no to anything you want to say no to at any time for any reason.
No,
because to your point, so many of us think that we have to act a certain way, or, I hate to bring up, dark topics, but, you think about how many stories you hear about women where something horrible or tragic happened to them. And you hear about, well, they didn't want to be mean, or they didn't want to be rude, or they didn't. And it's like, sometimes our desire to avoid saying no because we don't want to be seen a certain way, can put us in actual danger. Yeah. And then sometimes even when there's no physical danger, there's emotional danger, there's mental danger. Because if I don't feel like I have the autonomy to say no to another person, I'm really limiting myself in terms of what I'm able to say yes to.
No, 100%. I think, when we're just trying to set them from any, like you said, it's a tragic thing, but we're just so programmed, and society programs us, and TV shows and Disney movies, which I do love, shout out to Disney, but still, like all of those things program us to be subservient and like go with the line, and just, it's not to be rude or not to be mean, or we need to be polite and sing to the animals and all of the things. And it's, number one, it's impossible to please everybody, but the sheer fact that we prioritize making someone else feel more comfortable than having ourselves be comfortable, like that's just, it's ridiculous that this is something we're still doing in 2025.
Yeah. Well, and I'll share with you another story if I can. Yeah. I'll keep it brief, but I went on a date a number of years ago now, and it was just a very strange experience, and I was uncomfortable almost immediately. I felt like the person that I was going out with was not the person I had been having, conversations with prior to. And the behavior just felt off. And I knew I'm somebody who, like, I have a very strong gut instinct. Yeah. And I have a very strong intuition. And generally I listened to it. And it just felt off. And then he said something that I thought, well, he's trying to be funny, and it really didn't land well with me.
Didn't hit.
So I clarified that it didn't land well with me and why. Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, great. Misunderstanding. I'll give the benefit of the doubt. And then he did it again. Yeah. And I really didn't like it. And then there was a third moment. And that was the moment where it was like, I am so uncomfortable. And we are not even 15 minutes into the date. And I just looked at him and I said, I am very uncomfortable. I am choosing to not continue this. And I got up and I walked out. And that is something that I never imagined I would do. If you had told me 10 years ago, you're going to go on a date with somebody next year and he's, going to be a jerk and you're going to walk out, I'd be like, no, if I go on a date with somebody, even if we're not vibing, I give them the courtesy of, I can give you an hour, I can give you a cup of coffee, whatever it is. But in this instance, it was not just we're not a good fit. It was you are saying and doing things that I find offensive. And I've pointed that out to you, and you have chosen not to change. So my boundary was, I'm not going to sit here with somebody who says those things. I articulated the boundary. He violated the boundary more than once. And so then it comes back to that question of, okay, well, when somebody doesn't respect my boundary, what am I going to do for me? Because I'm not changing him, but I'm getting out of here. And I got up and I left. And, I remember talking to a friend and they were like, I can't believe you just walked out like that. And I said, why should I remain there in my own discomfort and allow him to do whatever nonsense he's doing? And so those are kind of the moments where we have to really talk about, in this moment, am I betraying myself if I don't hold a boundary? And I think that's super important because that's also how we build confidence.
No,
It's
a
every
thousand
time I
percent.
have my own back, every time I choose not to self-abandon, every time I choose not to betray what I believe and what I stand for is an opportunity to kind of strengthen that saying no muscle.
No, I completely agree. And I think that's so poignant to what, just to starting to set boundaries. Like you have to know, but then you have to develop the confidence. That's why it's a daily mindset. You said it's not going to just happen right overnight.
Yeah. And it's a process. I tell people all the time, it's like going to the gym. If I wanted to, I used to be a runner before I injured myself a million times. Um,
It happens
and
to us all.
yeah, I was like, getting old's for the birds. I know people who are older than me who run, and God bless them, but I feel like my body's it's like, no, let's do some slow stuff. But when I used to run, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to start running. And then I ran a marathon the next day, right? It's like you have to build up to that. It's like if you start lifting weights, you don't go into the gym and pick up like 300 pounds and start bench pressing it on day one. That's a recipe for disaster. And setting boundaries is the same way. It's like, okay, what small thing can I start with? So I always say, start with understanding where do I want to set boundaries? And then from there, I always tell people, pick something that's low hanging fruit. So when you're trying to set boundaries, especially if it's something you struggle with, pick a person or a situation that you are not super emotionally invested in. The example I always give is if you're somebody who has a relationship with your mother, don't pick your mom. Don't start boundary setting with your mom first, because you need to get some practice. You need to build that muscle. Maybe it's that peripheral neighbor that you don't see very often. Maybe it's that coworker who doesn't sit right next to you all day. And start practicing getting comfortable with setting a boundary, with articulating a boundary, with navigating pushback, with saying no. And then you kind of build up to those more challenging conversations, like saying no to your mom on Christmas, which I have experienced. But that was not a day one thing. And if I had tried to do that early in my journey of setting boundaries, I for sure would have had a different outcome because I wouldn't have known how to effectively hold a boundary and feel okay about it.
1,000%. So, I mean, all of this just accumulates into like why we need to have boundaries and how women, we need to establish them and how we need to do that. And when it comes to your coaching, how does your coaching one-on-one work to like help women set these boundaries?
So the reason that I focus specifically on one-to-one coaching is because I believe that this is a very individualized journey. I think that women share a lot of experiences in terms of socialization or lived experiences in the world. And based on where we come from, how we're raised, how we process things, the way I view something and the way you view something might be very different. So while I have kind of a structure to how I work with clients, there's also a lot of flexibility and fluidity to meet individual needs. So if I were to begin working with someone, one of the first things we would kind of do is talk about their goals for coaching and kind of their big picture vision. And then we would dig into things like, what are your core values? Let's really identify what are the things that matter most to you. A term that I love that was coined by Tara Moore, who's the author of Playing Big and who's an amazing author, coach. She does various things, and I've done a lot of courses with her. And she uses the term core nutrients. And I love the term core nutrients. It, like the first time she said it, it just like spoke to me. Because it's not just about the things that are important, but it's really about what are the things that are, I think of it as the things that make me me, right?
Yeah.
What are the things that I experience that light me up and that make my life worth living to me? And sometimes I feel like when women are super busy and they have that super long to-do list, if you really did an inventory, most of the things on that to-do list are other people's things. It's the things we do for other people, the things we do for partners, for children, for family, for friends, for community. And oftentimes there's not a lot of stuff on that list that is just for us. And so looking at that list and saying, if I'm feeling like, is this it? Like, I'm doing all the right things. And then day after day, I'm on this hamster wheel and I just don't feel lit up. I don't feel the joy. I don't feel the excitement. Well, that's generally because I'm not getting those core nutrients, right? Those things that make me feel like me, those things that make me feel like I want to get out of bed in the morning. If I don't have enough of that in my life, that's what makes life kind of have that gray hue, kind of that blah feeling. And the thing that's really great is once you identify what those things are, you can look at, yes, how does that look on a macro level? Because maybe one of my core nutrients is, I want to start and grow a huge successful business. But okay, what can I do on the micro level? Like, what is the need behind wanting to do that? And then maybe it's, I want to serve people in XYZ way. Okay. Well, how could I start doing that tomorrow? What's a very small version of that nutrient? And so we can build things into our life that doesn't require a 180 change. And that's something I also always want to emphasize to people, because I think sometimes, you hear these stories, and I will preface this by saying I love Elizabeth Gilbert and I've never read Eat, Pray, Love. I love her later work. And, I think some people, there's that book and it's you go and you have this, life-changing experience and you get a divorce and you get married and I don't think you need to do those things to completely change your life in a magnificent way. Sometimes it can be the smallest little shifts that can pay really huge dividends. So I tell people, you don't have to get a divorce or, leave your family or quit your job or move across the country or out of the country. It's okay if I'm having this craving to do XYZ. Is there a need that isn't being met? And what are my other options for meeting that?
Yeah.
So really digging into some of that work behind what is it that I need to feel lit up to love my life? What do I need to change about what I'm doing? Because if I have kind of this ideal life and I compare it to my current life and nothing is the same, okay, well, where do we want to start? And so kind of building out those opportunities to say, okay, well, I want to say yes to these things. I want to start with this thing. I need to create space. How do I create space in my day?
Yeah.
Where can I find space? What can I say no to? What does that look like? And then all along the way with that kind of strategic planning, is that mindset work? So as we're talking about, how does this make you feel? What are the thoughts you're having? Let's process through this. And let's also offer perspective. And I think that's something that as a coach, I do well. And that's something that I think is part of the beauty of coaching is sometimes we have our perspective and we don't stop to think about there's another way or 5 other ways or 27 other ways that we can look at something until somebody articulates it. And it's like, oh, I never thought of that before.
Yeah.
And the other thing I think can be really powerful is sometimes we don't even know what some of our thinking is until somebody points it out. And I always think back, there was a time a few years ago where I was working with someone and I happened to note that on a call, I think it was I don't remember now what the phrase was, but they used the same phrase 5 or 6 different times in the course of our conversation. And I finally just said, do you know that you keep saying the phrase and I repeated it? They had no idea. It wasn't top of mind that was a thought they were having, but obviously it was because they kept articulating.
Keep bringing it up.
And so again, that was one of those kind of what I like to think of the below the surface thoughts that we have to learn how to tease out. So that's, part of that mindset work as well is how do we raise our awareness of our own thinking? How do we work through things? How do we do kind of that backwards design on a really micro level of, okay, if I'm having this experience and I want to have that experience, how do I go from here to there? And then what do I need to train my brain to be doing?
No, I mean, it literally makes 1,000% makes sense. As we're wrapping up, I like to ask my guests one final question. It's never on the prep list there, but if you could give one piece of advice to your 16-year-old self, what would that be?
I would tell her to not lose her fire, because I will tell you, I went on a really interesting journey. I think, they talk about those teen years being the awkward, insecure years. And then we grow up and we blossom and we grow out of it. I kind of had the opposite experience. I feel as a 16-year-old, I'm not saying I didn't have insecurities, but I feel I was very bold, in a lot of ways. And I very much knew who I was. And I knew that I marched to my own drum and I really embraced that. And then fast forward a few years and it was I almost lost that somehow. It was almost the world hadn't somehow beaten it out of me yet. And then suddenly it started and I made that shift and then I came back around. I think I've, done a lot of work to get back that fire. But I definitely think I would tell my 16-year-old self just to just hang on to that. Don't go through that dip. Just keep on just tearing through life.
I love that though. And life hits you. And so then we change all the time. And there are such
Yeah.
things about my 16-year-old self. I'm like, you just you just kind of did it and you liked it. And like, there wasn't that much like pressure on you. There was no social media. There was none, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There wasn't like an influx of boys. There was none of that to like influence you. And so no, that makes complete sense. And I love that. And she's still bold. So don't worry. We're still doing all the things.
Yes. Yes.
So tell the audience where they can find you, where your coaching is. I've got your Instagram that we're going to tag and everything, but that way they can learn where they can work with you or connect with you.
Perfect. Yeah. So Instagram is Becky Upchurch _ Facebook. I have a Facebook business page. It's Hire Good Coaching, and it's hire with a GH. And then my website is just hiregoodcoaching.com. And it's Becky at hiregoodcoaching.com is my email. And I tell people they're welcome to email me. They're welcome to DM me. If I don't see the DMs right away, please don't be offended. But I'm generally pretty good about following up with people, whether, if somebody's interested in coaching, or sometimes, if somebody's just like, hey, during COVID, there was, oh my gosh, I can't even remember now what it was called, but there was this new social app that was audio only.
Oh, yeah.
I can't remember the name of it, but I did a Saturday morning mindset on that for a long time. And I would have people that would say, oh, I didn't want to come in and talk, or I didn't want to ask this in front of the group, but I had a question about this, or I had a question about that. I tell people all the time, if they're like mindset topics that they want to hear about, because obviously I'm passionate about boundaries, but I've done podcasts on body image and, confidence, and pretty much all things mindset is my jam. So if people are like, hey, I'd really just like to hear about this, or I'd love to see you post about that, folks can reach out for that too, because I always appreciate the input. Like, I try to get the lay of the land and what are people talking about and what are the needs, but people are experts in their own lives. So I'm always open to that kind of feedback.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that for not just the listeners, but for me, because that is always really helpful to know that like people are out there who are subject matter experts that can like help guide you, or you can ask questions too. And I think that's amazing. So everyone, make sure to follow her on Instagram if you want to talk about boundaries or mindset, like she said, or really anything within the mindset field, which is so much. Hit her up, ask her a question, see about one-on-one coaching, because I think the coaching has to be so magical and special. Like when you really just need someone to bounce things off of and help you develop things like boundaries or just your overall mindset goals that you want to do.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, Becky. I'm so glad we got to talk about this and talk about a subject that's just so prevalent right now for so many women out there. So thank you again. I appreciate it.
Yes, this was great. And thank you for having me. I'm glad that we were able to make it work.
Of course. Thank you, everybody. And we will see you next week.